This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
And this is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all who support us. If you enjoy our show, please consider making a monthly donation to us on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Joseph Anthony, this is our first episode since we have had Joe and Pat's excellent adventure. I'm looking for another shorthand to describe our move to the Big Apple.
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yes,
right
exactly. That's some months ago now, but
right. But as of recording, this is the first time we've been able to sit down as housemates.
yes,
Right.
yes, reunited the first time since formation.
Exactly. Well, since our ordination.
Yeah, true.
Because that first year, well, actually, the first 6 months of our priesthood, we both were living at St. Dominic's in D.C., and then our roads diverged, if you will, and now they came back together. All good things come back together. Right?
Yeah, this time both roads led north.
They did. Not up 95, because we ended up going through the Pennsylvania countryside.
It was very scenic. It was very nice. Father Joseph Anthony, what's been the best surprise for you about life at St. Vincent Fair in New York, where we now live?
I love praying in that church. Absolutely love it. It is a beautiful church. Some say it is the second most beautiful church in the city of New York. I believe it's the first. I said that. That's right. Dem fighting words. But no, I really love praying in St. Vincent Fair. I love praying Compline together. At night when you walk in that church and it's just kind of dimly lit, the candles are there. You get the sense that even though it's an empty church and it's a grand church, but you know that all of those candles have been lit by somebody who has knelt there and interceded for somebody else. So you get the sense it's actually a very full church in that way. I love praying in that church. I knew it was a beautiful place, but I did not really expect how much I would love and how spiritually enriching it would be to pray in that church on a regular basis.
It's quite funny. When I showed pictures to my sister Kathleen of St. Vincent Fair Church, I did a little video and sent it on. She said, it's like you moved to medieval France. It's just like
it's true though.
You enter into St. Vincent Fair. I think this is the striking thing about it. It really is like going into another universe.
Yeah.
In the best possible way. One of the things I like about it, you rightly asserted that it's the most beautiful church in New York City. I agree with that. I actually think it's the most beautiful church in America. So I'm just going
Let's go big or go home, baby.
It's really absolutely fantastic, and it would be fun to do an episode on the architecture of St. Vincent Fair. So we'll table that for another day. Friends, if you want that, let us know, because I think it'd be cool.
We might do a series on YouTube Shorts or something like that. We don't necessarily have to do a studio episode.
That'd be neat.
Yeah.
That's a fun idea. But St. Vincent Fair, I think the most remarkable thing about St. Vincent Fair, this is what I really wanted to share, is that St. Vincent Fair is a church that people pray in.
Yes.
And, so I liked your description. It's not just beautiful, but you said you like praying in St. Vincent Fair.
I do.
And it's the sort of church you walk in, you get all the smells of the candles, you get the residue of incense.
It's warm in that way.
Yep. It is. And
in the summertime without air conditioning, it's even hot, some would say.
It is. And I think, so what you get there, I think, in all of that is the residue of prayer in a way that you don't, with all respect to St. Patrick's, which is a mighty church, America's parish church. Even,
yes, America's parish.
You have a sense that St. Patrick's is full of visitors, but St. Vincent Fair is full of people who are going to pray. And that it's really... It really, in that sense, is a place of solace. It's a refuge in the city. For me, I have to say that I was extremely nervous about moving to New York because of the scale of the city. And the thing that I appreciate most is that St. Vincent Fair is very near Central Park.
Yes.
And I have found such delight in walking through the park. I just love going for walks there. It's amazing. It's such a great place to explore. And it's full. I think part of the reason why I like it so much is the park is full of history and monuments.
Yes,
and little things that are worth noting. So I've learned all. I can't say that I've learned all about the park. I've learned a very little bit about the park, and I'm excited to continue to learn about the park because it's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, more than you had before you moved up there. That's for sure.
That's true. Yeah, like the Bethesda fountain, for example. This is one of my favorite features, which features the angel coming down and touching the waters. Very biblical, right?
Yes.
Like the angel's wings stir the waters.
Oh, wow.
At Bethesda in the Gospels, we hear about that. Anyway, so there are many little Easter eggs in Central Park for people to enjoy. Now, all of this is a very long prelude.
Yes.
Because our move to New York was a surprise, right? It was something
For both of us, right? Yeah.
that we weren't expecting. And I think many people in life have experiences like that, where they get a sudden change, where there's something very different, something they have to face. And our moves have actually been really, really great things. But there are many things in life that happen that are not positive, even if it's a surprise and something you have to kind of navigate, that doesn't seem to admit of as great a solution as living in this wonderful community on the Upper East Side has done for us. So I really wanted to get to this in an episode where we dive into it, because I think this is a question that every believer faces.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important question to talk about, because if you're going through something, you need help articulating what it is that you're experiencing. If you've been through a major suffering in your life, you need help articulating that. So this question, Father Joseph Anthony, why do bad things happen to good people, is really about suffering. And I wonder if you might lead us into how we might begin to respond to it. What does it mean to ask this question in Christian life?
I think it's a few things. It brings up the question of suffering. It brings up the question of evil. It brings up the question of the benevolence of God. We had another episode on God's foreknowledge and the freedom of the individual and all these different aspects. So it kind of encapsulates all of these different questions and issues, but it's typically articulated in very kind of commonplace or pedestrian question of, all right, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Like, I think there's that approach to it is not respecting the mystery of God and the mystery of humanity in a real sense, that we think of everything as just being a simple kind of exchange or a balancing act. Like it's input output. I do the good things. I say the right things. I've followed the rules. That's my input because I'm obedient and I'm upright and I do the right thing. And as a result, I should get good things. And thus, it's all about input, output. And thus, when I do all the right things, I've followed the rules, and then I get slapped in the face. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I think maybe it's an approach that's a little too linear. It's too thin. That doesn't really reflect the dynamics of reality, of God, of humanity. But when we look at this, it's wrestling with this fact of the mysteries of evil, the mysteries of the failures of humanity, and the mystery of suffering in these ways. But we know through the promises of our faith, we know through the Gospels and the victory of Christ over sin and death, that these mysteries should not disturb us in the sense that we lose hope. They can disturb us and discourage us, rightly so, but they don't need to rob us of the hope that the Lord does fulfill his promises to each of us. So I think before we dive into the specifics of it or really start to break down all these different aspects, is to take a step back and say, are we even approaching this reality from the wrong? Are we too narrow-minded? Is it too linear, too thin, that we just think that our life on this earth, our pilgrim journey on this earth, is just simply play by the rules and get your results? It's maybe all result driven. Thus, it's an input output gain. And thus, if I do the right things and I have all the right inputs of the code, then I should get the expected result. That is, I get the good things I want in that way. I think that's probably the wrong approach to it.
I completely agree. I think challenging that indignation that the question represents is very important, right? Because anyone who says, why do good things happen to bad people? Well, I have an easy answer for you, is lying. There's not an easy answer to this. And the rest of the episode, the best thing that we're going to be able to do, as you're saying, is pull it apart and to look at some principles. so we can shed some light on this, but ultimately clarity is not going to be given to us, I don't think, until such time as we can view the situation of our lives from eternity. I think too, the point you made that underscores this kind of indignation that arises is based on our human perspective. And so sort of what I want to do in announcing the principles that we're about to enumerate here, and some of the principles we're about to unpack, I want us to step back and really be able to take more of a God's eye view, or at least attempt to view as much as we can from the perspective of God, based on what God has revealed to us, the way that things look in our lives. So I think the first principle, Father Joseph Anthony, the first place we need to begin is to unpack the mystery of free will and the origin of evil.
Sure.
So when you're having this conversation with someone who's really going through it, and we want to step back and we say, like, well, where does this stem from? I think the origin of the disjointedness of our experience of the brokenness of the universe can be traced back to this first point.
I will tell our listeners to sit tight for about roughly 7 days and watch the episode with Father Gregory and Father Bonaventure, where they really talk about free will and God's foreknowledge, because they do a fantastic job of talking about this. The principle I want to introduce here, which will hopefully tee up next week's episode, the thing I want to tee up there is that God doesn't necessarily cause this evil or this suffering directly because he's a masochist and just loves to watch things burn. I think there's when we talk about, yes, God is all powerful and he can cause all things and that, but he's the cause of causes, where we as human beings can also be legitimate causes, but we also cause things, right? And so in a certain sense that he does cause that, but he gives and he wills that certain things may happen according to our freedom and our free will. And sometimes that free will can be abused. And when that does get abused, it is typically the results in suffering in other individuals' lives, right? So the Lord does not necessarily cause suffering. He doesn't cause evil. He does permit it, though. I think that's one of the things, that he's the cause of causes in that way, and he is permitting the freedom of humanity to choose, to choose right or wrong. And typically the results of wrong are suffering and pain and evil in that way. And so when we talk about this, we have to recognize that fact that the Lord does not actually desire suffering. He doesn't want us to be in pain. He doesn't want bad things to happen to us. We're his children. But he's not sitting up there dishing out playing cards, dealing cards out to people. Like, I want to give them a real crappy hand just to mess with them a little bit. Like, he's not a masochist. He doesn't hate us in that way. He's actually a good father. And because of that, he sees our suffering and actually enters into it. He rejoices in our joys, and he suffers with our suffering. He grieves with our sufferings as well. He's not at a distance. He's not the clockmaker God. He's not on the sidelines. He actually enters into these realities with us, albeit always respecting our freedom, because he's caused that because it reflects him. But he enters into those realities with us. So I think the first thing that we have to be able to recognize and even articulate is part of this mystery that the Lord permits evil, albeit not actually directly causing it.
That's right. So what I wanted to get to, what I wanted to underscore here is that we need to protect God's goodness. I really loved the way that you phrased that, and by suggesting that the origin of evil is the result of the free will of God's creatures is very important, because it allows us to say, well, ultimately the discord in the universe is only permitted by God and not caused directly by him, and that distinction is critical. I love the image, if the philosophy talk is too heavy for your listeners, I love the image that Tolkien gives in his prehistory of Middle-earth in the Silmarillion, because in that work, angelic-like spirits sing the world into being, and evil enters the world when one of the spirits begins to sing a discordant note. And it's the disharmony that causes all of the beginnings of the wrongs of the universe to emanate forth. And what I think the image that Tolkien has offered us provides is a way to understand, well, the goodness of God is the harmony of everything he has made. And evil, which is disharmony, comes from the free will of creatures, which moves them out of the original harmony into discord and melody. So.
And I love that image. I talk about so many aspects of our Christian life is about harmonies, like, that image can be used or applied in different ways. But I think that original question that we're beginning to wrestle with is, why do bad things happen to good people? In this kind of input-output aspect is like, we need to balance things. I've put so much good. I've followed so many of the rules. Can't I get a little sliver? I need to have this equal balance. And I think it's not about balancing act. It's about harmonies in this way. Being in a harmonious relationship with our Creator, right, who we bear the image and likeness of, being in harmony with the rest of his work, direct work of his hands, i.e. nature, and being attentive to nature, our own human nature and the rest of creation around us, there's a harmony that is desired there, not a balance.
Yeah, that's right. Not one-to-one, but synthesis.
Yes.
Yeah, the larger whole. So then I think it's important then to ask, well, what can we say happens when the believer encounters evil? So oftentimes you hear people say, well, this thing is happening to you because God is going to draw a greater good from it.
I hate people that say that.
What do you make of that saying?
And I hate all of that. Okay, false. Quick hitter on evil. Evil is a privation of the good. So there is a good that should be there that is not present, right? It's a lack of a good. Evil cannot stand on its own. Evil is dependent of good. Good can stand alone on itself, right? So good exists in and of itself. The lack of that good, the privation of it, is what we would refer to as evil. Evil does not exist on its own. There are not two forces at work, good and bad, and they're always at tension. You're right. Evil's a parasite on the good. We have to be able to call that out right from the very get-go, right? Now, the thing that you said is like, oh, God is causing this evil, or he has a plan for you. That's another way that it's always phrased. Like, oh, this thing is bad, but don't worry, there's a plan. God, this is part of your plan and that. No, absolutely not.
Father Joseph Anthony, you're saying God doesn't have a plan for me?
No, he does have a plan for you.
I'm very scared right now.
Yeah, God does have a plan for you. But his plan isn't to toy with you and to cause you pain and suffering just to mess with you. Right? His plan is for your glory. His plan is for your union with him in this life and in the next. So when bad things are happening and people say, oh, this is part of God's plan. No, he doesn't enjoy our suffering, right? Now, what I also know is the case because of his promise and how we have seen the life of Jesus Christ come about is that God can draw good even from tremendous evil. There's nothing outside of his purview to redeem and to draw good from it. But to say that this was part of his plan from all eternity for you to have a really messed up relationship or whatever that is, God can draw good from those situations, but he hasn't dictated this as part of your plan in that way.
Right. I like the point you're making here insofar as we're saying that God doesn't need evil to make good things happen to us. It's not required. It's not required. Now, I do think, though, looking at the spiritual tradition, that sometimes God does allow us to experience suffering for important reasons. Like, for example, take the avoidance of a sin. Like people who struggle with lust, to grab one of the seven big ones, right? They often become very frustrated with it. And St. Thomas Aquinas, along with other spiritual authors, if memory serves me, we're talking about St. Bernard, St. Augustine of Hippo, maybe even John Chrysostom here on this point, but they all say that God allows us to fall into a particular sin to spare us from a larger, from a greater, a more grievous sin. So it could be the case that God allows us to struggle with lust for a very long time, for example, to preserve us from pride, which is far worse.
Yes.
So to preserve us in that way from something that would be more deadly, a lesser evil. Again, to use this important language, and this language is very important, which is why we said at the top of the episode, God permits or God allows, doesn't directly will. So God permits or allows this. And from there, we can argue that, okay, God is using this, God is allowing this to be that we might find spiritual growth from it, right? We could be refined in it. So I really appreciated your point in emphasizing that God doesn't need evil to draw good. It's not necessary, but that God can. And I like this point from the tradition about growth, about experiencing growth in the spiritual life by moving from lesser evils and being preserved from greater ones.
And I think to understand that appropriately is not that God doesn't need evil to make good, but he actually can and does make good from evil, right? The evil of the crucifixion. But like there was tremendous good that came about that he drew from that. But to your point as well, which is, I think, extremely important, is to see how God maybe treats some of these sins. Like you said, he permits or allows somebody to struggle with a particular sin to maybe help them learn a lesson earlier, learn a lesson with a lesser sin instead of having to deal with a more severe sin. Now, what does that reveal to us about God if he's allowing this to happen in a certain kind of pedagogical way in the spiritual life to allow for spiritual growth? Well, he's treating us like his children. That's how a father treats, right? To learn the lessons in a more, in a lesser, when things are, the consequences are a little more less at risk, you know? So we actually start to see the paternity of God who treats us like his sons and learn and trying to teach us these spiritual truths and realities in a gradated way. So I really love that point about our tradition that says, like, yes, evil is permitted, and maybe we struggle with certain sins, or we struggle through a period and we suffer through a period, that the Lord permits it as a pedagogical way to maybe depend on him more, or maybe to turn to him for his mercy and his patience and forgiveness in a lesser kind of context, so that we don't have to deal with the more grave realities, that we learn those lessons at an earlier stage so that we're not at a higher risk later on down the road, where maybe if we are dealing with pride, then we're a little more self-dependent and think that we can handle this and we can fix it ourselves.
I love the popular quote attributed to Teresa of Avila, where she's complaining a little bit to the Lord, as she's wont to do. And I need to see if this is authentic, because I don't actually know whether or not it is. But I love this quote attributed to her, which is she's complaining to God, and she says, if this is how you treat your friends, maybe this is why you have so few of them.
Yeah.
and the quote really resonates, right? Because we feel like there's an injustice being done to us, when in fact it's better. We promise to back up and view this from God's perspective, when in fact God owes us nothing. And that we are at all is only because of God's goodness. That he has a plan for us, as you've said several times very beautifully, is only because of God's goodness. That there would be any kind of pedagogical process that we would go through that would refine us spiritually is because of God's goodness. That everything,
he has not abandoned us. The amount of times that we disobey and turn our backs on him,
everything is to be received as good given to us by God.
Yeah, and so when we are going through a particular suffering that maybe is the direct result of our own actions, we've messed up.
I think that's one of the difficulties, right? Is facing the consequences of choices that we ourselves have made.
Yeah, that sucks, right? But the Lord doesn't abandon us. He will never abandon us. He'll never turn his back on us, right? But what about the times where we're suffering at the hands of another? Maybe not to play the victim card on this, but maybe we are the victim of other person's bad decisions, and that we have to then endure a tremendous amount of suffering because of that, through no fault of our own, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? You're driving down the road, you get hit by a drunk driver, and now you have to deal with the rehab, the surgeries, and maybe the paralysis of all of these things, right? Now that was no fault of any of your own, right? So how do we make sense of those realities, right? And I think that there is this, like we've been kind of dancing around it, that there's a certain mystery to this, right? There's a mysterious nature that it doesn't make quote unquote logical sense. But recognizing, as we have, that the Lord doesn't abandon us through any of this, that he is very present to us, and that he isn't he isn't thrown off or scared or scandalized by our own sufferings. Even the sufferings that he permits, he has also promised to be present in there. And that's why I think when we think of this kind of dualistic side of things, there's two forces, good and evil, are always at work, right? To proclaim wildly that in the presence of evil, in the consequences of evil, which typically is suffering, that the Lord is still present in all of that. That is a wild claim. And yet that is the gospel. And yet that is our Lord's desire for us. And that's his promise. And he cannot be unfaithful to the promises that he's made to us.
The other quote from Teresa of Avila that gives me great consolation is she assures us that from the perspective of eternity, all the evils of this life will appear as nothing more inconvenient than a poor night at an inn. It's a variation of that, right? Like it's a night in the bad hotel. And I think that ultimately recognizing, okay, we've received all of these good things out of the abundance of God's love for us. We recognize what they are for. They are for us to be with God forever. In eternity. That steels our will. That gives us confidence in the Lord's work and directs our hearts towards the future goods that are going to come, right? So all of the past good things we have received are evidences to us, as you've underscored, of God's faithfulness, and they're the foundation upon which we build our hope for the good things to come.
Yeah.
And that all of it ultimately is oriented towards God's work, which is the work of grace, which is God drawing us to himself.
Mm-hmm. And so I think for our listeners and thinking about this, whether you have somebody in your life who you think has done everything right, and yet they can't catch a break, or maybe they've done everything right and they continue to get their legs chopped out from them, or maybe that's you, right? How do we encourage? What are we supposed to do in this situation? I think the things that I would encourage is first to be able to, in a real sense, kind of name and articulate and claim the sufferings that we have. And say, like, I'm suffering right now. That is the first step of us embracing the cross and thus uniting it to the cross of the Lord Jesus and saying, okay, Lord, this is my current cross that I have to bear, right? Whether I chose it because of the consequences of my bad choices, or whether that has been given to me through somebody else's actions, this is the reality in front of me. And that kind of takes the mystique of this evil away from us, because evil wants to be, oh my gosh, this kind of grand shadow upon us and wants to be this larger than life reality to rob God of his mercy at the end of the day. But if we can always be mindful of the reality, to name it for what it is, articulate that and draw ourselves into that reality, and thus surrendering it over to the Lord, uniting it to his sufferings. He could have saved us in any mode possible, and he chose that it was the most fitting that he should endure suffering on our behalf. And uniting that suffering to say, Lord, I unite this current suffering, this evil that I'm enduring, whether it's through my actions or in others, to yours. Be present to me here. That is living in a promise in a real, true sense.
Yeah, I've learned to overall in my own spiritual life to pray those words of Faustina with great hope, right? Experiencing great sorrow in life, but declaring, Lord, I know you will continue to be good to me. To say very simply these words of St. Faustina, Jesus, I trust in you.
Yes.
It's a declaration of that promise. It's a declaration of hope that's going to continue to build that up. And as you're saying, to recognize that we're not abandoned by the Lord, that he's there in the midst of our suffering, and that we can continue to hope in him.
Yeah.
Friends, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Godsplaining. We are so grateful that you would spend time with us. We hope that this episode has helped you really to navigate some of the difficulties of your own spiritual life. If you have further questions, reach out to us, drop a comment on this episode, wherever you're listening, on whatever platform you've found us. Like and subscribe to Godsplaining so you don't miss an episode. We appreciate that. We do invite you to visit godsplaining.org, where you can find out all kinds of information on upcoming Godsplaining events, where you can shop Godsplaining merch and catch up with the Friars. Follow us on social media if you haven't already. And above all, we ask that you would pray for us. please know that we're praying for you. God bless.
Father Bonaventure, if you had the choice between holding a toad and subscribing to a YouTube channel, what would you choose?
Subscribe to a toad holding a YouTube channel.
Oh my gosh. Please subscribe to a toad holding a YouTube channel, especially if it's ours. Cheers.